All right, welcome back to our study on Theodicy. This is session 4. Kind of got off track in that first session. That's kind of what I do. We're blaming it on Eric now. I can tell you now we're not going to make the 30 pages, but we'll get as far as we can. Okay, so here we go. About 10 years ago, I heard a guy say something that I didn't think much about when I heard it. His name is William Lane Craig. I don't know if some of you may have heard of him, you may not. But he made an interesting statement. And I didn't think much about it when I heard it 10 years ago, but I'm thinking a lot about it now because it makes me wonder, what does he understand about that? I didn't actually hear him talking about this subject, but I just did hear this quote. So here it is. He said, "I don't think God could create a world without suffering unless it had an antecedent world where suffering existed." You understand, an antecedent world is a world that came before. That's very interesting because he seems to be saying the very same thing I'm saying to you. That the suffering in this world is supposed to impact us sufficiently to make it possible for there to be another time in which we could be without suffering. And so this, I believe, is that antecedent world. And because God is allowing the full consequences of sin, and He's allowing the full range of sufferings that people see and experience, God is, by doing that, by allowing that, He is doing something eternal and beneficial long-term and necessary. And so let me give this to you on the PowerPoint because I think it's important. Why is God allowing evil and suffering? He is educating His saints on how to live throughout eternity with our free will still intact without sinning. And if you begin to look at it this way, I think some things will make sense. Let me give you a verse. Let me take you back to Romans chapter 7 and show you what this is supposed to be. And by the way, you know what? Before I do that, let me just make, Mark mentioned something to me at the break, and I don't want someone to misunderstand what it is that I'm saying. So I want to be clear about this. There is a well-known television preacher. Who it is not important. A well-known television preacher who claims to have achieved sinless perfection. And then proceeded to talk about that is what allows him to be able to view pornography that he can now do just for research purposes. I'm just going to say that if you have allowed yourself to do that, you have not yet reached sinless perfection, because that is not a righteous act. So I'm just going to, you say, but I think you could look at it for, no, I think you're supposed to see sin differently. So I want to be clear to everybody. I'm not talking about that wild kind of this is my definition of sinless perfection, and now I just get to do whatever I want to do and I'm okay. See, that's not it. So I don't want anybody to be confused about that. All I'm talking about is every time you have the ability to make a decision to be righteous or unrighteous, you have the ability to be righteous. And so if we're not, it's because we have chosen to not be. And I think it is possible each time, treating them all individually, it is possible to choose righteousness. And that's my point. But I think to get there, sin, the way you understand sin, has to change. Now let me give you that verse. Romans 7:13. Was then that which is good made death unto me? Paul is talking about the law here. God forbid. But sin, that it might appear sin, working death in me by that which is good, that sin by the commandment might become exceeding sinful. So I'm going to just say, the job of the law was first of all to make sin appear as sin. In other words, let sin appear for what it is. Secondly, that it worked death in Paul. And I said to myself in my notes, when we realize what sin is doing, it ought to scare us to death. It's putting our functional life to death. We thought, oh, just the law did that. The law was good, but it did that by sin. And then the last thing is the really important one, and that is, it makes sin appear exceeding sinful. And folks, I'm going to just say, until sin appears exceeding sinful, you're not going to be able to be turned loose in the creature. Something is going to happen in which you become convinced about the horror of sin, so that you treat it like the poisonous death that it is. Now I want to take you to Romans chapter 6 and verse 19. And by the way, when I say sin, I'm talking about the little ones too. Okay, so here's the next one. Romans 6:19. I speak after the manner of men because of the infirmity of your flesh. For as you have yielded your members servants to uncleanness and to iniquity unto iniquity, even so now. And why is he saying now? Because now we know we have been made dead to sin and alive unto God. We realize that's part of our sanctification. Even so now, yield your members servants to righteousness unto holiness. And I dare anybody that wants to misconstrue what I'm saying, I love them, to go to Romans 7 and find Paul giving you a loophole to tell you not to expect to be able to do this. It's not in there. Paul is not giving us an out. He is not telling us, oh, don't worry, nobody's perfect. I'm just suggesting this. See, I don't see it that way. This is what he expects from us. But you know what? The way that we have understood how to live this life, this is something we have to work on to get to. It's not like instant. And so we're going to discuss this a lot more later in number 7, which is why God allows suffering, and in number 10, how we're going to be sinless in eternity. But for now, just know that in eternity, God is not interfering with our free will. He is not limiting our freedom. He's not manipulating our mind so that we think we're making a free will choice, but really we're not. And He's not doing anything to make sure that we don't sin again as an active interference in our activities. There's no magic wand. There's no mind wipe. There's no lobotomy. God is not going to chaperone us throughout eternity. He's not sending an angel along so that anytime you get ready to do something, he taps you on the shoulder and goes, He is not doing that. And we're still not going to do anything that we're not supposed to do. And I have another surprise for you. Once again, in eternity, God is not going to be dealing with you out of His omnipotence. Think about that. By the way, you see this all throughout the Bible. Did God deal with Adam and Eve out of His omnipotence? Not really, because when He comes into the garden, you remember what He says? Adam, where are you? And he says, well, I was naked, so I hid myself. And the Lord says, who told you you were naked? Did you eat of the tree that... Let me ask you a question. Did he know what Adam had done? Well, sure he did. He wasn't taking a Sunday nap. He knew what had happened. But he wasn't dealing with them out of his omniscience. He was dealing with them in a real relationship way. And that is the way it's going to be in eternity. But there's a twist to that. Now wait till we get to number 9 before we discuss that one in more detail. But the point I'm making is, in eternity, you're not going to have to be looking over your shoulder to see who's looking. That's not what's going to keep you from doing what you shouldn't do. So think with me about this. Look, when people don't like their circumstances, you know what their automatic default is? Let's blame God. Suffering is happening in the world. We know natural evil came from a man, and we know moral evil come from all kinds of people. Everybody is contributing to that one. Well, we don't blame us, and we don't really blame Adam too much. We blame God. And it's interesting, because I found something in Proverbs about that. The foolishness of man perverteth his way. Yeah, man does stupid stuff, and he pays the price for it. And his heart fretteth against the Lord. He blames God. Of course he does. I found some other verses about that, but I just give you the one. Men blame God for things that are actually their fault. And people who don't understand what God is doing by allowing suffering and evil in the world would ask questions like this. Now, this is important because you may run into this question. Instead of allowing suffering and evil, couldn't God have done this a different way? Couldn't he have done it differently where people wouldn't be suffering like this? And my question would be, well, what would he have done differently? And if you ask that question, some people will, I'm going to give you 3 answers, because I think these are the ones that people would ask. And so he says, well, God could have stopped Adam and Eve from eating of the tree of knowledge of good and evil by walking up to them and go, hey, what are you doing? Now, if he had walked up there, do you think he could have stopped that? Of course he could have. Let me ask you a question. Did he know what they were about to do? Well, he did. Did he know what the serpent was doing? You say, but he allowed it. He allowed it. He did. And you know what? This question about why didn't God just... In your notes, I called it the dog collar objection. You ever seen people put this electric, that put the deal on there, and there's a boundary in their yard, and if the dog goes beyond that boundary, it goes... Unless the dog know, up, back up, you can't. I call this the dog collar objection. Why didn't God put the dog collar on Adam and Eve, and every time they did something that wasn't right, it got that little reminder, so they wouldn't do it? Let me ask you a question. How would you like to live in eternity like that? How would you like to live this life like that? How would you like somebody following you around and correcting everything that you did wrong? Every time you were thinking the wrong way, every time you were talking the wrong way, every time you were acting the wrong way, they headed you off at the pass before you could actually do it, because that's what they're asking here. Before they eat that fruit, intercept them and just stop that. You know what the truth is? Nobody wants to live like that. You know why? You are no longer a free moral agent when that happens. And you know what? Here's the one thing I know about people. We don't like others telling us what to do. So the objection is absurd on its face. They're actually asking God now to do the one thing they wouldn't tolerate. By the way, that's why some people don't want to go to heaven. Because they think it's going to be like this. Something's going to happen that you're going to have to do the right thing all the time, and they don't want somebody looking over their shoulder, and they're not going to put on the dog collar. Okay. By the way, this is really bad for a person who hasn't really learned about the horror of sin. Because now that's all they do is wrong thinking. And you know how many times they'd be corrected in a day? See, at the end of that, they'd have no patience for that. Okay. So let me get to the next one here. And in your notes, we're going to flesh this out a little bit, but I think you get it. If you did, by the way, you know what you'd get? you wouldn't get real heartfelt obedience. You just get forced compliance. Is that the idea that we're supposed to have of heaven? Forced compliance? See, that doesn't work. So that objection, why didn't God? Well, because of that. Because it actually violates your free will. And if you don't, by the way, if you don't have enough freedom to get it wrong, you don't have enough freedom to get it right either. So God has to do that. So let me get to this next one. And just to say it, we're talking about what eternity will be like. You have to understand that when God turns the body of Christ loose in the creature to do all the things that they're going to be doing, you will never have had so much liberty and freedom ever in your life, ever. People think we're going to be under this oppressive scrutiny when we get to heaven, and you're not. You're not. You're going to have, in your notes I say it like this: you don't get a handbook at the judgment seat telling you, here's all the rules about what you can do and what you cannot do. Because you will have been conformed to the image of God's Son, your desire will never be to do those things that would be in the handbook. And God can feel completely at ease putting every member of the body of Christ throughout the creature and knowing that that's not going to get ruined like this earth did. That's really a marvelous thing to think about. Okay. And I just say that to say, you don't have that kind of freedom here. You can get in your car and you can say, I can drive anywhere I want to go. Well, on a public road. But if there's a gate up that says private property, no trespassing, guess what? You don't get to drive down that road. You don't get to walk across that property. You don't get to fish in that pond. You don't get to hunt in those woods. You don't get to do that. By the way, you can drive down a public road, but there's a speed limit. Out here, I think it's 112. I'm just going by what I see everybody doing. But you know what? You don't have absolute freedom to do whatever you want to do. There's things that guide that. But when you get into the creature, can I just tell you this? You won't believe it. So I'll just tell it to you. And when we get up there, I'm going to tell every one of you, I told you so. And here it is. You will never have had such liberty and freedom as you will have when you get into the creature. And God can trust you to have that. You will have never known that kind of liberty. And it is going to be of a nature that it glorifies God for you to be that way, because it will come from your heart. And we're supposed to be putting that in there now. All right, let me give you this next one. By the way, if the end result of our education isn't good enough for God to turn us loose in the creature, why in the world are we involved in it in the first place? I mean, really, it can't do that? Is that what we're saying? See, I don't believe that. God says, okay, you're going to have this education, you're going to get some stuff, but at the end, I really need to manipulate everything so it really turns out okay. See, I don't think that's how that works. I think the process is genuine, and I think it works, and I think it's effectual, which means it can't be improved upon. I don't think God needs to do some little magic trick at the end to make sure that the deal gets sealed. See, no. I think that's Satan's whole argument. Okay, here's the next one, Romans 6:22. But now, being made free from sin and become servants to God, you have your fruit unto holiness, and the end, isn't that strange to tack onto this verse, everlasting life? You know what I'm looking at when I see this verse, what I see in this now? I see we are made free from sin. Now, that doesn't mean you can't sin anymore, but the status that you used to have in Adam, whereby you were under sin, has now been changed. You've been set free from sin. You become servants to God. You have your fruit unto holiness. And you know what I think? You're supposed to carry that into eternity. It's something that happens here and now that actually now is going to be carried out in your everlasting life. That's all I'm saying to you, is there is a process that we're supposed to engage in right here and now that has an impact on us in eternity. And I think this verse is actually talking about that. And that will be the greatest life imaginable that you could ever have. And God is not going to alter our personalities in order to make that a reality. And He's not going to make us all the same so that we look like we're just clones of each other. And there's no distinctions of personality or things that we prefer over other things. No, He's not going to erase all of that. He is going to give us the freedom to live lives that are so glorious and so diverse that when you first hear it, you might be tempted to say, I just can't hardly believe that. So we'll be doing everything the way we're supposed to because that's what we'll want to do. And we'll want to do that for a reason. It won't be on a whim. It'll be based on something that we've been taught. So here's the next objection. Well, why did God put the tree of knowledge there in the first place? I mean, couldn't He have put it someplace out of reach? Or couldn't He put that angel with the flaming sword by it to keep people away from it? But do you understand? You're asking, it's the same principle, it's just a different question. Once again, you're saying, why didn't God limit my free will? That's still what you're saying. And you know what people would do? If God did that, they would be up in arms immediately going, God's not fair. Well, that would be sin too, so I guess He would have to keep them from doing that. I mean, you understand? I mean, this never ends, right? So again, I'll let you read about that in your notes. But look, let me just give you a bit of an example. When my kids were little, like everybody else, we had coffee tables and lamp tables with little things on them. And what we did is, we had friends, and I'm not now giving you a commentary on how you're supposed to rear your children, but I'm just going to tell you the way I did it. And that is, other folks, when their kids were walking around and toddling, they put everything up out of reach so that they couldn't get anything. I understand that, but I didn't do that. I left everything right where it was, and I just taught them what they could touch and what they could not. Because by the time they become adults, they better have learned some self-restraint and know where boundaries are. And I think you can't start teaching that too early, given our nature. So that's the way I did it. Now, I'm not saying that's a perfect way, but it worked for me. But here's the point I want to make from that. God put the tree in the garden in order to prepare us for an eternal life with absolute freedom and liberty. Maybe the guy was right. Maybe you can't create a world without suffering unless there's an antecedent world that had suffering in it. And then everybody actually sees it for what it is, and because they know what the cause of it is, they kind of say, you know what? We got to stay away from that. But I think the only people that can really learn that, though, are the people who have trusted Christ as their Savior, because until then, they're just so much under sin, I'm not sure they can really get that lesson. I think you have to have spiritual fitness to be able to have that. I think it also requires edification, but I'm just saying I don't think lost people can do that. So let's just kind of cut to the heart of the matter. God allowed the tree to be put in the garden because if man doesn't have the ability to choose wrong, then he really doesn't have free will. And so God is allowing now for an eternity of freedom and liberty. And you may say, I don't understand how that works. Well, if he never allows us the opportunity to disobey, how genuine is our obedience? So that's the point. If God stacks the deck so that we don't actually have free will, although we think we do, are you really acting out of love for God? If what he's done has made it impossible for you to do anything else. See, I don't think that works. That's disingenuous. Because then, can we really be trusted? In other words, are we going to remain like small children who can't be trusted to do the right thing? Or does it glorify God to have sons and daughters who, like adults, know what to do and what not to do, and have the capacity to do that which is right? See, that's the one that glorifies him. That's the one I think we need to be looking at. Because if we don't have free will, we're no longer in his image. And we're nothing more than a train on a track that can only run where we've laid the track down and we have the liberty to do anything else. We're not sons and daughters with any real liberty. We can't be trusted on our own to do the right thing. And folks, I don't think that is God's plan for us in eternity. Let me just forever limit your freedom. I don't believe that. And there's reasons that I don't believe that. It's not that I prefer to believe that. There are reasons that force me to believe that. So God put the tree in the garden. He gave a severe warning about it. If it had been enough, it would have worked. But the fact is that it needed more than a strong warning. You know what we needed? Anybody want to give me the word? We needed an education, but the education came by way of
experience.
Consequences. Because once you get the consequences, look, all you have to do is touch the hot stove once. And now you figure it out. Okay, Cliff. How can you have free will if you don't have what? And that's the point. Well, because you have the ability to do other than you did. That's what free will is. Free will is the ability to do. When you had a decision. I'm trying to make sure I know what you're asking me. You're saying if you don't know. Right. Well, because Adam chose to disobey, so he had free will. Yeah. Can you intelligently exercise your free will? See, that may be the question. The answer may be you can't. You're asking the question. I'm saying I think your question is the point. Until there's been a world where we saw the consequences of it, you probably couldn't have a world without it until you got that first-hand knowledge of how bad that really was. And then you go, oh my gosh, that was like poking my eye out with a pin. I'm not doing that. No, he didn't. No, but because they had the ability to obey or disobey, they chose to disobey. And you know what? This is what we're talking about here, what's happening to us every day. That's the knowledge of good and evil. That's the education we're getting. So Adam got it, but he didn't really get that till after he fell. And now he's getting an education in good and evil. And so are we. So the whole human race is getting that education. And perhaps I'm just going to say perhaps, because I don't know this for absolutely sure, but perhaps that was necessary in order to turn free will beings loose in the creation. Right. Because everything until then is theoretical. Right. So I think you're just making the point. When, what was the guy's name? Craig? Can't remember. When he said, I don't think you could have that until you had one that you had all that in it. And that would be the thing that schooled you to say, gosh, we can't do that again. And I think we'll see it. I do. I think we'll see the reality of it and understand the consequence. And that's why I just say when I want to talk to Adam about that, he may say, I just didn't. I mean, he said it, but I didn't. You know what? I hate to do it this way, but I get calls all the time or emails from people that say, I was going back and listening to one of the studies that you did years and years ago on justification or sanctification or something like that. And they said, and I heard you say X, and I know you said it the first time because it's on the recording, but I didn't get that. My mind just went right over that. Now, I'm not saying Adam's just being careless about it, but I'm just saying, because maybe he doesn't have a frame of reference for what that is, he hears it. But does he really get it? But you know what? Now we are all going to get it. Now we are all supposed to be getting that understanding. So I'm agreeing with your question. So now let's do one more objection. Why didn't God deal with Adam and Eve before they have kids and pass down their sin nature to them? And he had plenty of time to do that. Well, and I put this in purple, which means I put it on the PowerPoint. I'm going to put it up. Oh, I only put a little bit up. By allowing them to reproduce children, I'm just going to read my notes. By allowing them to reproduce children with a sin nature, and by allowing sin to produce its full consequences of suffering, God is doing, that's what you're looking at. God is doing two things. It's not complete. Here we go. Number one, for everyone, He's providing a context which allows men to fairly and freely of their own will to decide if they want to spend eternity with Him or without Him. Folks, when we get to this, number 4, that is the issue where I'm going to spend time explaining the details of that. For now, just understand, one of the things that God is doing, that He had in mind by allowing them to reproduce, and those kids are going to have a sin nature, but He is providing a context by which people in this world will genuinely decide, do I want to spend eternity with the God of the Bible or not? I'm going to show you some things when we get to number 4 that I think is going to change your understanding of eternal punishment. I know it's going to change your understanding of that, but it is also going to let you know, I don't think people are going to hell accidentally. And I'll explain that when we get to number 4. But that's what that's about. But here's the one we're after in this context, number 2. And for the saints. Now, that first one is for everyone. But for the saints, He is teaching a lesson upon which their eternity rests. And what is that? How to live without sin, without being forced to, and without intimidation or manipulation. That's the lesson that He is teaching us. And you know what? He allowed them to reproduce, knowing that there was going to be sin and suffering, knowing they were going to commit moral evil on each other, knowing that they would commit atrocities, because until we see those things, we don't understand number 3, the depths of sin. Because once you do, no one will have to tell you about it again. Once you get that message. That's why He did that. And that is the answer to that third question. So by allowing sin and evil, God is educating us on how to freely choose righteousness. And by the way, how to lose that longing for the pleasures of sin. You know, the Bible talks about that, but there is a cure for that. So that in eternity, that will never again be an option for us. And this part of our education is a big part, listen, a big part of being conformed to the image of God's Son. Because this knowledge and this understanding is what allowed him to live a life in human flesh and be without sin. If you say the only reason Jesus was without sin is because he was God in the flesh, then you know what? We don't stand a chance. But if Jesus grew, does anybody remember that scripture? He grew in stature and in wisdom. Which means he didn't start out with everything all there. He had to learn it like we learn it, and he had to live it like we live it. And you know what he was? He was the example of what can happen, but to a human, only after they've been justified unto eternal life. Because until then, they don't have the capacity to do this. Because everything they'd be doing is out of their flesh. And you already know, if you're going to try to overcome sin and the power of your flesh, not going to work. So let me take you to Romans 8 and show you this verse, because the point I'm making is this education of what sin and suffering is supposed to be, how it's supposed to be impacting us, and the result of that in the future eternity, a big part of our being conformed to the image of God's Son. And by the way, he's going to say it happens to every one of us. This is going to happen. He might as well have said the word surely, because it is going to happen. And he's going to make sure it's going to happen. Here it is, Romans 8, 29 and 30. For whom he did foreknow. And that is not talking about specific individuals. He knew Gloria, he knew Linda. He's not talking about that. He is talking about he knew he would have sons and daughters. He knew they would be part of the body of Christ. But it was a mystery that wasn't revealed to anybody. But he knew it. For that's what he's talking about. For whom he did foreknow, whoever they are. And by the way, did God know about Gloria and Linda? Yeah. But he's not talking about it in that way. He's talking about all of these sons and daughters. For whom he did foreknow, he also did predestinate. What does that mean? Predestinate. Pre means before. Destinate, what's the root word? Yeah, destined. He before, and if something is predestined, what does that mean? It cannot but happen. There is no alternative. It is going to happen. What did he say is going to happen? He predestinate to be conformed to the image of his Son. Do you know how much you're going to be conformed to the image of God's Son? Completely. And guess what? That is your destiny. You will get there. You will either get there through the education now, or he will get you there at the judgment seat of Christ. I'm not going to tip my hand on that one, but when you see what I'm going to show you about that, you're going to say with me, I don't want to receive that education at the judgment seat. I would rather learn it here. By the way, can I just tell you something? And this is good news. This is good news. Because when I kind of came to this understanding of what was going to happen at the judgment seat of Christ, to convince me about how bad I really am and my little sins, how much they really are an atrocity in the face of God, when I finally began to get a clearer picture on that and understood that what was going to happen at the judgment seat to make that happen, I was very uncomfortable with that. Now, God is not going to, I'm not telling you what it is, but he's not going to do that to embarrass us. And it's not punitive, because those sins are under the blood. But he is doing it to educate us. And I have to tell you, I looked at that. I had Mark come over one day. I really don't get to see him. I know everybody thinks he lives around the corner and I see him all the time. You know, I don't. But I talked him into coming over one day before Pam came out. And we're sitting on the front porch, and I said, I want to just scatter shoot this Theodicy. And I got on this judgment seat of Christ thing. And as I'm talking about it, I'm just saying, but I'm telling him what it is. And I'm going, I got to tell you, I am not looking forward to that. And Mark is going, you're not looking forward to it. I'm not looking forward to it. It wasn't until after I had that conversation that I discovered something Paul was taught, a principle that Paul was giving us in 1 Corinthians 11. That if we would judge ourselves, we shall not be judged. Oh, if I can learn that lesson now, I won't have to face it at the judgment seat of Christ. Now, I know that doesn't mean much to you because I haven't told you what that is, but believe me, when we get to number 8 and I tell you what it is, you're all going to be saying the same thing Mark and I said. I don't want that. I don't want that. That would do it, for sure, that would do it. But I don't want to wait till then. But I mean, that's a sonship choice, right? All right. So he has predestinated us to be conformed to the image of his Son. Every one of his sons and daughters. And so that is going to be happening. And I've just now told you the big deal. If you say, if it's going to happen here, why the big deal about trying to do it now? Because that is going to save you something at the judgment seat of Christ that, believe me, you do not want to go through. I believe that is what Paul is talking about when he refers to the terror of the Lord. But I'll save that for that. So I know that at this point that may sound a little far-fetched to some folks. Like me, you were probably brought up under preaching that, scolded you for sin and yet, acted like you really couldn't do anything else from time to time. I think that's an error. But I think we all have a choice to make, and I think you can choose to be. So I want to bring this in. What have I got left here? Oh, good. 2 minutes. All right. So I need to give you some verses, and I need to talk to about some things. I'm just going to really beg you to read your notes on this because I'm just elaborating on the point that I'm trying to make. But let me give you a couple of verses. I've given you this one already, so I'm not going to talk about it again, but I am going to give you this one. Let not sin therefore reign in your mortal body, that you should obey it in the lust thereof. Does that sound to you like he is expecting something less? See, when I look at that, I think he fully expects that we should be able to do that. How often? Every single time. Every time you have a decision to make where you can be righteous or unrighteous, I think he has an expectation that we will choose righteousness. But what I want to do is I want to make a practical application to this, and that is by saying, how is it? I'm just going to turn that off and just take a minute, and then we'll wind this up. We didn't get through all the notes again, but here we are. The kinds of sins that you're going to be committing are probably the same kinds I'm going to be committing. I said earlier, I know this is not a room full of serial killers and murderers. You're okay. Oh, I just wish everybody could see what I see when I'm up here. So what do we do that's so bad? Well, it is bad. In fact, it's worse than we think. But here's what we do. I'm going to use myself as an illustration. So here I am in a situation, and because of something that has happened, I immediately have this tendency now to respond to that in a certain way. Now, I'm just going to invent a scenario here. So let's say, it'll never really happen, but let's just say a fellow grace preacher is critical of me and, really is trying to discredit me so people won't listen. Okay. You know what my flesh's reaction to that is, right? Let me tell you about the things he doesn't have right. Let me discredit him a little bit. But you know what? If godly love and charity is really working in me, what am I supposed to do to the... Let me just take you through the verses. What am I doing? Let me just take you through the verses. I'm just going to go through this, okay? Am I not going to get there? No, I got to wait and do that next week. I know what I'm supposed to do. What am I supposed to do? Okay, Eric goes, 5-second countdown. Interrupt that process. Thank you for saying that, by the way. Thank you. And thank God one person listens to my sermons. Now, I'm supposed to not go down this road of retaliating. What is that? That would be rendering what? Evil for evil. See, I know the doctrine. But if I go, you know what though? This guy is always on my... You know all I'm doing? All I'm doing is making up an excuse so that I can do what? Disobey what I know my Father is asking me to do. Now, if he showed up in person and asked me, like we talked about last week, I would do it, but am I really doing it then? The real test is when I don't have that sense that he's right there in person asking me and then looking at me to see my answer. This is the test of where I really am. Is the doctrine in and of itself sufficient for me to respond in a righteous response to my critic? And so now I have a decision to make. And what I choose will not only tell me what I think about my Father's instructions, but it will also tell me how much I think unrighteousness is really adversely affecting this world. Because if I do it, I'm thinking, you know what? It's not really hurting anybody. That's what you think. Can I just tell you something? I'm going to go back to the judgment seat deal. Do you think your Father is omniscient? Do you think he not only knows what will happen, but he also knows what would have happened had you done something differently? See, I think he has that kind of omniscience. There are theologians and religious philosophers that think God only knows what will happen. But see, I think we proved that wrong when we went back in the Old Testament. Remember when David was in the town and he said, is Solomon coming? And if he does, will these men turn me over? And you remember what God said? He is coming and they will turn you over. And David says, well, then we got to get out. So it never happened, but God knew what would happen, even though it was not a real future. But it was a possible future. I think God knows all the possible futures. I'm going to I hate to do this, but I'm trying to convince you that I'm just not a lunatic. I don't know if I can do that, so let me choose different words. I'm trying to convince you that maybe I have a point, even though I'm a lunatic. I have a valid point. Thank you, Rachel. So, at the judgment seat of Christ, one, not the big one, but one of the things that I think our Father will show us is how our unrighteousness has affected this world by showing us what would have changed had we been righteous. And when we see the difference and we realize we are personally responsible, we will begin to understand the depth of those little rebellions against God. That they weren't little after all, but they had an impact in this world. And this isn't the stuff we can blame on the people who did genocides or Adam. This one's solely on us. And I'm going to tell you, it will be a sobering day when we come face to face with our contribution to evil in this world. And that is going to happen. Unless you can judge yourself. I personally would not look forward to that part of the judgment. And by the way, that's not really the worst part. I know you're looking at that and you're going, there's something worse? Oh, I think. But the part, and I'm not talking about anybody losing their stuff. You understand? I'm not talking about any of that kind of stuff. But you understand, if God did that, you do understand He would not be doing that to humiliate you or embarrass you, although it would be very embarrassing, would it not? He would be doing that to educate you about what sin really does do, so that you now will see it the way He sees it, because now you understand the consequences of your own sin in this world. I'm serious about that. I know I've never, you know why I know people don't talk about it like that? If somebody does, and I wouldn't doubt there's somebody somewhere that has seen that and talked about it, but it's not popular. I know nobody would want to hear about it. But look, we are going to learn this lesson one way or the other, and He's going to do it without manipulating things. It's going to be a real education that works, that really works. And because it will work, we're going to do that. So when we come back, what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through verses in which we are given a portion of the doctrine, and I'm going to show you how I can be in this situation, and that verse will come to my mind, and now I have a decision to make about what I'm going to say or do in response to this. And if I disobey the doctrine, what am I really doing? If I just go, well, I'm just choosing not to do it. This time I'm just going to do what my flesh wants to do. What am I really doing when I do that? What am I really saying when I refuse to do the doctrine that I know I should do, and instead I do this other thing, which is unrighteous, by the way. And if it's not righteous, the Bible says it's what? It's sin. And what am I really saying? I'm saying, I don't care what my Father says, this is what I'm deciding to do. I don't think He's got it right. I think this is what I should be able to do. Or, you know what? I just want to do this. It doesn't, see, when you do that, you don't understand what you're saying to the whole creation by your refusal to do the doctrine. You know what you're saying? Obeying God is not a big deal. I can pick and choose when I will obey Him. And when it suits me, I will. And when it doesn't suit me, I won't. What does that say? That's not... You want to face that one at the judgment? You want to see what the result of that is? And you say, well, He's not going to do... Oh, don't kid yourself. You're going to get this education one way or another. I'm begging us to get it here and now, listening to me reel off a list of atrocities that just we don't like to think about, and I understand it, and then talk about there's no such thing as little rebellion, and talking about, because folks, this is where ours is. You're a different kind of people. Yours is not the kind that you're going to go out there and commit some kind of, you're not going to walk into the elementary school and shoot 18 kids and 2 teachers. But these that we're doing, see, we look at that and we go, well, that's terrible. But you've got to come to the place where you understand, when you tell God no, that's just as terrible in His eyes. The only difference is, I don't even know if that guy was saved. What else could he do except whatever his flesh dictated? We're supposed to know better. We're supposed to do better. Now, I'm not trying to chide us over it, but I'm trying to grip us with the seriousness of it. I know someone's going to come along here and try to undo this, and if they can, well, then they can. But I'm just telling you, if you're going to get up there in eternity, you are predestined to be conformed, and He is not going to do that by magic act. He is going to do that by showing you what you are responsible for. And when you see that, that will be a wake-up call. Because there won't be any more, well, I mean, my stuff isn't that bad. Now you will see it for what it is. Sin will finally become exceeding sinful. I'm begging us to do it before we get there. Let's start settling this issue and moving on in our sonship life. And I know it sounds strange. I'm just sure that this is just going to shock the Christian world, and people are going to look at this like I've lost my mind. But just all I'm asking you to do is stick with me through all 10. And when you see it all together, it will make perfect sense. I'm hoping it's already beginning to make sense. But if it hasn't, I understand. We've only covered the first 3, and I spent both sessions today trying to go back and reinforce the things that we're talking about in those first 3. But when you get through all 10, you're going to see this in a way you've never seen it before, and you'll understand God wasn't bad by allowing these things. He was actually making something else better possible. But you know what? All of that will be for nothing if we don't learn the lesson. And you can. I think that's the good part. Okay.